Okay, our next lesson on politics and power is social class and voting behaviour, the connection between these two things. What class you are, what social class you are, middle class, working class, and how you vote in elections. Hopefully, you are unsurprised to learn these two things are very closely connected. So we're going to investigate the connection between these two things and to understand how they have developed and changed and develop our political thinking skills. Keywords are class D alignment, tendency, absolute change, industry unions, new working class, new Labour. Class D alignment is a fancy phrase. Alignment, if you line up, de-alignment, you stop lining up. Tendency, it tends to this, it tends to that. It means not everybody, it's not an absolute, it's a tendency. Okay, so let us start with what we'd call in sociology class alignment. It used to be very straightforward. The working class lined up and voted Labour. The middle class lined up and voted Conservative. It was dead straightforward. Yeah. And then what's happened is you have a few people in the middle who would float around. Yeah. Some middle class people who might vote a little bit Labour sometimes, a little bit of this sometimes, and that would depend on elections. But basically, the social classes lined up. Middle class, Conservative, working class, Labour. And that's what we call class alignment. Yeah, so if you went to a Labour club, working class people, they'd vote Labour. The middle class, you could rely on them, these sorts of people, they're going to vote Conservative. Yeah. That was how it used to be, maybe 30, 40, 50 years ago. Now, why is this? And we think the reason is because people were socially segregated back then. The middle classes and the working classes lived very separate lives. And they felt very middle class and working class. In particular, the working class, working in big factories, working in industries, having belonged to unions, felt very working class. And as part of feeling working class, you voted Labour. Yeah? So if you look at this chart, see the various elections. Say you will have voted in elections in 2010. You can see how it started to change. Yeah, we'll go through all this in more detail. So this is middle class, mostly voting Conservative, but quite a few voting Labour. Here's the bottom of the working class, mostly voting Labour, but quite a few voting Conservative. Yeah, that's the next bit, that's called class D alignment. But as to why they did vote that way, we had class alignment. People felt loyalty to their social class. And then, probably in the 1980s, you got what's called class de-alignment. More and more people left their social class politically and would vote for the opposite. So middle class people voting Labour and working class people voting Conservative. Not all the time, just some of the time. So all the way through the 90s, what happened is that most working class people voted Labour and some middle class. Yeah? And the last election, what you tended to get is this. So Labour lost a lot of votes, the Conservatives got more. Now, why is this? It's referred to as class D alignment, as I said. And we have to figure out why. Yeah? So it's reasons like this. Especially in the south of England, you started to get what's called the new working class. Self-employed, plumbers, that sort of thing. It's similar to a notion called bourgeoisie that we mentioned before. Working class people were starting to feel a bit more middle class. Certainly not feeling very working class, self-employed, that sort of thing. Quite prosperous. It was referred to as loads of money back in the 80s. Yeah. And the other way, the other direction, you have lots of people who are born working class who become middle class. Yeah? So people like myself, working class background, you go to university, you become a teacher, you're middle class, but you still might tend to vote Labour. Yeah. So that's why class de-alignment's happened. So how do people choose? Yeah. It's meant to be rational self-interest. You have to think about what's good for you. But often we think people don't think about it quite so clearly. Yeah. They tend to vote for the person, ooh, Nick Clegg, he's a nice young man, I like him. Rather than this guy here, this is Jeremy Thorpe. He was a leader of the Liberals a long time ago. These days, he'd never become a leader of a party because he looks too strange. Yeah. Winston Churchill, one of the greatest prime ministers ever lived, led Britain through World War II, fought off the Nazis, was a drunk. He would never win an election these days. Instead, you have photogenic, which means good on camera, David Cameron. So people tend to have strange reasons sometimes for voting, not just rational self-interest. And what happens is political parties, they have focus groups. They ask groups of ordinary people what they like and dislike, and then change things to suit them. Because they're after these people, the floating voters, the independents, people who haven't definitely decided who they're going to vote for. They're the people politicians are really after. And in class, discuss how far sociologists would agree that there is no longer a link between social class and voting behaviour. Yeah? It's quite a common sort of question. We'll go through it in a lot more detail in class.